Back to our top story of the day, the mass shooting at Umpqua Community College in Roseburg, Oregon. The attack once again prompted President Obama to address gun violence in America.
As I said just a few months ago, and I said a few months before that, and I said each time we see one of these mass shootings, our thoughts and prayers are not enough. It's not enough.
Well, according to the Washington Post, there has been at least one mass shooting in America every week of the president's second term. Chief White House correspondent Major Garrett takes a look at how Obama's responded to these, how his responses have evolved over the presidency.
After the Aurora, Colorado movie theater massacre, President Obama played the familiar presidential role of grief counselor.
We may never understand what leads anybody to terrorize their fellow human beings like this. Such violence, such evil is senseless. It's beyond reason.
After Sandy Hook, a day the president called his worst in office, Mr. Obama struggled with the enormity of loss and for the words to help a nation cope.
I know there's not a parent in America who doesn't feel the same overwhelming grief that I do.
It was then Mr. Obama turned toward gun control, an issue he had marginalized before Sandy Hook.
And we're going to have to come together and take meaningful action to prevent more tragedies like this, regardless of the politics.
Then pro-gun rights senators killed the president's push for wider federal background checks on gun sales and limits on ammunition clips. Mr. Obama stood with Sandy Hook families in the Rose Garden and, for the first time, flashed some anger.
There were no coherent arguments as to why we wouldn't do this. It came down to politics.
After the Charleston church shooting, Mr. Obama's patience had worn thin, even as his sense of resignation had grown.
I've had to make statements like this too many times, and it is in our power to do something about it. I say that recognizing the politics in this town foreclose a lot of those avenues right now.
And yesterday, after more than a dozen statements on mass shootings here in America, the president identified a deeper, more complex dynamic behind the political paralysis.
The reporting is routine. My response here at this podium ends up being routine. What's also routine is that somebody somewhere will comment and say, Obama politicized this issue. Well, this is something we should politicize.
Major Garrett joins us now from the White House. Major, we've seen the president make these impassioned speeches before. This one, he almost seemed angry, but then it kind of falls flat. He can't seem to get anything passed with Congress. Do you think maybe he should work with the individual governors instead?
Well, that's one option, but of course, after Sandy Hook, the massacre that really stunned the nation, rattled this White House and set a conversation here on Capitol Hill and with this White House in motion on gun control, many states around this nation did act. Some with more progressive Democratic governors like Martin O'Malley, just north of us in Maryland, worked with the legislature and passed gun control legislation along the lines of what the president proposed at the federal level. But other states with Republican governors and Republican legislatures loosened their gun laws and made it more accessible, that is to say, access to firearms, or enlarge the space for concealed carry permits. So it's not as if the nation at this state level hasn't had a debate on this issue. It has. In some cases, it has moved in the president's direction. In some cases, a few more cases actually, it hasn't. And you touched on something that I think is bigger and more important than whether the president works with governors or doesn't. I do a good deal of studying of the American presidency, not only present but past. And one of the things that always astonishes a president is how much power you appear to have, and in some instances, how precious little you actually have. And in this particular area of American life, the president has not only felt powerless to stop those who are committing the acts of violence clearly, but powerless to change the conversation or change the emotional reaction of the nation. In fact, he fears the emotional reaction of the country is moving in exactly the opposite direction it ought to, from his point of view, to a place of routine acceptance or numbness, as he said yesterday. I think that was the most telling thing the president said. He was sending a warning signal to this country that it is accepting a new normal that would have been and should always be unimaginable.
Major, President Obama encouraged the media to look into how many deaths are caused each year from gun violence compared to terrorism. A Vox reporter made a graph with that information, and it's also worth noting, and you're looking at that right there, but it's also worth noting that the Washington Post has noted that there has been a mass shooting every week of President Obama's second term. Are these the kind of numbers that could help make an impact?
Well, there are two completely separate debates. It's interesting to compare the numbers because, of course, the numbers of deaths in America to gun violence have always outstripped just about everything else except traffic accidents and other things. Gun violence has, from the president's perspective, certainly for worse, but throughout our American cultural experience, been more or less accepted as a price of the Second Amendment, which protects access to firearms. It's been a long-running debate. I've been in Washington since 1990. Gun control has been a constant issue and a constant topic of both political confrontation and larger cultural discussion. So the issue about confronting terrorism and what we do with the CIA and the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security is an enormously important government function after 9/11. That the numbers are so low as compared to gun violence, from that point of view, is actually a success story. Gun violence existed before 9/11, it has existed after 9/11. And the country has taken some steps at the federal level to deal with it legislatively, and as I said, taken some steps at the state level since Sandy Hook, but the debate continues, and what the president's frustrated about is that before the gun violence was more random and linked to street crime or drug crime, now there are these episodes of mass intense shootings, possibly always motivated by mental health issues, or maybe not. He doesn't know, the country doesn't know, but he thinks it ought to precipitate different political action. It has not, and that has left the president not only frustrated, but as we saw yesterday, more than ever before, visibly angry.
Absolutely. Major Garrett at the White House for us, thank you.
You got it.